The hum of tires against asphalt filled the air as Leah Monroe's car sliced through the quiet expanse of the interstate. It was a typical morning for the 32-year-old commuter, who, like so many others, navigated the highway with nothing more than the rhythm of the road and the mundane routine of her daily drive. But as her car cruised through the empty lanes, a sharp, deafening sound shattered the calm, the crack of a high-powered rifle echoing through the morning air. In that single, devastating moment, everything changed. Leah Monroe's life was irrevocably altered as a sniper's bullet struck her while she was behind the wheel. The shot came from an elevated position, a vantage point somewhere above, but the question remained, where? With no clear sight line or any obvious source of the attack, authorities were left with nothing but the chilling certainty that Leah had become the latest victim in what could only be described as an active sniper case. A case that would soon confound investigators, and a case that would leave the community and the nation searching for answers. There was no weapon found at the scene. No suspect, no clear motive, and no usable evidence. Highway cameras captured a handful of vehicles stopping momentarily on the shoulder, but the plates were unreadable due to the motion blur. The investigation had only one lead, a single, fatal shot, and no one knew where it had come from. As the investigation unfolded, the questions only multiplied. Was this an isolated incident, or the start of something far more terrifying? For those who knew Leah, and for the detectives on the case, the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. This is the case of Leah Monroe, a woman struck down in the prime of her life by an unseen hand. And it is a case that continues to haunt those who seek justice in the shadows. Leah Monroe was, by all accounts, an ordinary woman leading an unremarkable life. At 32, she had found her place in the world, working as an administrative assistant in a small but respected firm. Her days followed a predictable pattern: wake up, commute, work, and return home. She was friendly, dependable, and well-liked by her colleagues, though not someone who sought the spotlight. To those who knew her, Leah was simply a hard-working woman with a warm smile and a steady presence, the kind of person who blended into the rhythm of daily life. Each day, Leah drove the same stretch of highway. The interstate, busy yet predictable, had become a familiar backdrop to her routine. It was a route she knew like the back of her hand, a path she had taken countless times without ever imagining that it would one day become the scene of a violent and inexplicable attack. Leah's family described her as someone who could always be counted on. Her parents, who had raised her in a tight-knit community, spoke of a daughter who was always quick to lend a helping hand, whether it was assisting with chores at home or supporting a friend through a tough time. Her colleagues praised her professionalism and kindness. Her friends adored her sense of humor, her ability to make everyone feel at ease. Yet, all of this was about to be ripped apart by an act of violence that no one could predict. When the news broke that Leah had been shot while driving along that familiar stretch of road, the shockwaves reverberated far beyond her immediate family. Those who knew her were left grasping for answers, trying to comprehend the brutal randomness of the attack. Was she targeted? Or was she simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? This is where Beyond the Evidence comes in, to unravel the mysteries that often lie beneath the surface of unsolved crimes. Our deep dives explore the overlooked details, the untold stories, and the relentless pursuit of justice. For more investigative reports like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we continue to uncover the truth behind cases like Leah Monroe's. Leah Monroe was not just another face in the crowd. Behind her quiet demeanor and routine life was a web of relationships that defined her. She was the daughter who never missed a family dinner, the friend who always remembered a birthday, and the colleague who went out of her way to support her team. To those who knew her best, Leah was dependable, warm, and inherently kind, qualities that made her a beloved figure in her community. Her family described her as the glue that held them together. Raised in a small, close-knit town, Leah was the type of person who cared deeply about those around her. She was the first to call her parents just to check in, and even as an adult, she made sure to spend holidays and weekends with them, cherishing the time spent with her family. Her relationship with her parents was a source of pride and comfort for them. Leah, as their only child, had always been their anchor. Her friendships were equally meaningful. Leah had a circle of close friends who admired her ability to listen, offer support, and always make them laugh when times were tough. One friend described her as someone who could light up a room with her energy, yet she never sought the attention for herself. She would quietly stand by, offering a word of encouragement or sharing in the joys and burdens of those closest to her. To her friends, she was irreplaceable, a constant source of strength, stability, and joy. Leah's colleagues at work also held her in high regard. As an administrative assistant, Leah had a reputation for being efficient and detail-oriented, traits that made her a cornerstone of the office. But it wasn't just her work ethic that endeared her to her co-workers. It was her personal touch, remembering little details about their lives, offering assistance when needed, and always going the extra mile. She was the person who could make a tough day seem a little lighter with a friendly word or a smile. Her relationships, both familial and professional, painted the picture of a woman who had established herself as an integral part of the lives of many. Leah's world was built on strong, lasting connections, the kind of relationships that are formed over years of shared experiences and genuine care. Her loss was a blow not just to her family, but to her friends, co-workers, and the community that had come to rely on her quiet strength. Yet as loved as she was, the question remained, who could want to harm someone like Leah? As the investigation into the sniper attack unfolded, the glaring absence of any clear suspects or motives only deepened the sense of disbelief. This wasn't the crime of someone with a history of animosity or ill will toward Leah. This wasn't a crime of passion. The randomness of it all was what left everyone reeling. How could such a deeply connected and well-liked person be struck down without any apparent reason? The questions began to multiply, and the more investigators uncovered, the more they realized that this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a case that would demand answers, not just for Leah, but for all who knew her, for all who had shared in her life and now struggled with the uncertainty of what had happened. The morning of Leah Monroe's attack began like any other. She woke up early, prepared herself for another day at work, and set off for the familiar drive along the interstate. It was a stretch of highway she had traveled countless times before, one that she knew by heart. The hum of her car on the asphalt, the rhythmic passing of mile markers, the predictable ebb and flow of morning traffic. For Leah, it was nothing more than the routine of her daily life. Yet that morning, something would shatter that normalcy, leaving her and everyone else in her wake stunned by an act of violence that seemed to come from nowhere. At approximately 7:30 a.m., as Leah drove along the highway, a single shot rang out. The rifle's blast pierced the calm of the morning, striking her as she navigated the interstate. The impact was devastating. In an instant, the normal world she knew vanished, replaced by chaos and confusion. Leah's car swerved, but the damage had been done. She was struck, but not in a way that made sense. A high-angle shot, the kind only a sniper in an elevated position could deliver, left no clear answers. Investigators were left with little to go on. The scene was desolate, the highway barren of witnesses. The only evidence immediately available was the ballistic data, a single, fatal shot fired from above. But there was no vantage point where the shot could have been taken from that would yield any usable evidence. No high-rise buildings, no overpasses with a clear line of sight, just an empty stretch of road. The more the investigators delved into the case, the more the puzzle seemed to grow, and the more questions emerged. How could such a thing happen in the midst of morning traffic, without any apparent warning? Surveillance footage from highway cameras showed several vehicles stopping briefly on the shoulder of the highway, likely in response to the chaos that followed the shooting. But the footage was inconclusive. The cameras, designed to capture every vehicle traveling along the road, were distorted by motion blur, rendering the license plates unreadable. It was a dead end. The cars had stopped, likely out of concern for Leah's condition, but no one had seen anything that could offer a clue. In the days following the attack, investigators revisited the location, searching for anything that might help explain how such a precise and calculated act could unfold without warning. Experts analyzed the ballistic trajectory of the shot, but the absence of physical evidence, such as a weapon or clear location for the shooter, made it difficult to form any solid leads. Some speculated that the sniper was a seasoned professional, someone who knew how to disappear without leaving a trace. Others considered the possibility of an isolated, random attack, but the meticulous planning of the shooting seemed to suggest otherwise. The early warning signs, however, were disturbingly absent. There were no reports of threats against Leah, no indication that anyone had a motive to target her specifically. This wasn't a case of personal vendetta or dispute gone wrong. It was as if Leah had been chosen at random, or worse, as though she had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The randomness of the attack was unsettling, leaving investigators grappling with the realization that the motive, if there was one, might be something far darker and harder to understand. This uncertainty was compounded by the chilling possibility that the attack was part of a larger, more terrifying pattern, the work of a sniper who could strike again at any moment, without warning or reason. For those who lived along that stretch of highway, the fear was palpable. They, too, were now at risk, unsure whether they would be next. In the days following Leah Monroe's shooting, the sense of unease only deepened. Investigators found themselves confronting a baffling and highly dangerous situation. The evidence was sparse, a single shot, fired from an elevated position, and nothing more. No weapon was recovered, no direct witness statements, and no clear suspect. What was initially thought to be an isolated incident began to reveal itself as a much more complex and troubling case. The trajectory of the bullet, examined by ballistic experts, confirmed the devastating nature of the attack. The shot had been carefully planned and executed from above, with a precision that suggested a highly skilled marksman. The sniper had not only struck Leah at the perfect moment, but had done so with an alarming level of expertise. Every detail, from the angle of the shot to the lack of physical evidence at the scene, seemed to point to the work of someone who was not only experienced but also remarkably calculated. As the investigation unfolded, law enforcement began to suspect that this was not the work of a spontaneous or emotionally driven individual. There was no history of threats against Leah, no known enemies, and no indication that she had been involved in any type of conflict that could have led to such an attack. And yet, The precision of the sniper's actions indicated that Leah was not just a random victim. If this was a targeted attack, then the question became, who would want to harm a woman with no apparent motive? The lack of leads only fueled the anxiety surrounding the case. With no suspects, investigators focused their attention on the sniper's possible location. The elevated shot suggested a vantage point that could only be achieved from a location like an overpass, a tall building, or a hillside. But none of these options provided a clear line of sight to the stretch of highway where Leah had been attacked. A search of the area turned up nothing that could point to the shooter's position. It was as though the sniper had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace of their presence behind. What made the situation even more unnerving was the fact that Leah's shooting had occurred in broad daylight, during a time of day when traffic was heavy. Yet, despite the busy road, no one had seen anything. It was as though the sniper had perfectly timed the attack, knowing exactly when to strike, and then melted away into the crowd of cars. This was no simple crime. It was a cold, methodical attack carried out by someone who knew how to remain hidden. As the investigation intensified, law enforcement faced mounting pressure from the public. The possibility of a sniper operating in the area sent waves of fear through the community. Residents who had once felt safe on their morning commutes now found themselves looking over their shoulders. Was this just a one-time attack, or was there more to come? The uncertainty weighed heavily on everyone, from the police officers searching for answers to the residents who felt increasingly vulnerable. In the face of this growing panic, the authorities took a hard look at the evidence they had. The highway cameras, which had captured vehicles stopping on the shoulder after the shooting, offered no conclusive leads. The motion blur on the footage made it impossible to read any license plates, and the vehicles themselves provided little more than fleeting glimpses. It was clear that the shooter was not only meticulous in their actions, but also in their efforts to cover their tracks. The lack of any clear suspects or tangible evidence turned this case into one of the most frustrating and perplexing investigations in recent memory. As the days turned into weeks, the fear that this might be the beginning of a series of sniper attacks began to take hold. No one could be sure whether Leah was the only victim, or whether the sniper was preparing to strike again. The feeling of being hunted by an unseen, unknown force began to permeate the community. The idea that this was a random act of violence became less and less likely, as investigators came to the disturbing conclusion that this sniper, whoever they were, had a level of control and intent that was terrifying in its own right. The escalating fear of a serial sniper on the loose prompted widespread media coverage, with experts weighing in on the nature of the crime. Some speculated that the shooter could be a disgruntled individual with a deep-seated grudge, while others wondered if the sniper might be targeting random victims for reasons that were impossible to fathom. Yet no theory could account for the chilling precision of the attack. Each possibility seemed to lead back to the same unsettling conclusion. The sniper was a ghost, with no clear identity, and no sense of remorse. Leah's case was now firmly in the spotlight, not just for the horror it represented, but also for the mystery that seemed to cloak it. The lack of answers only made the situation more dire. The community and the investigators were left to grapple with the chilling reality that an unknown assailant was capable of carrying out such a calculated and invisible attack. The immediate aftermath of Leah Monroe's shooting left everyone reeling, unsure of how to process the violence that had unfolded in their midst. Emergency responders were on the scene quickly, but by the time they reached Leah's car, the damage had already been done. The single shot had left her critically wounded, and the confusion surrounding the attack made it clear that this was no ordinary crime. Despite the swift response from paramedics, Leah's condition remained precarious, and her family was thrust into a nightmare they could scarcely understand. For those who knew Leah, the disbelief was overwhelming. She had been so deeply embedded in the lives of those around her, from family to friends to co-workers. Her absence in the immediate aftermath was palpable, leaving a void that couldn't be filled. In the days following the attack, her loved ones struggled to comprehend not only the severity of her injuries but the chilling randomness of the act itself. How could someone as ordinary as Leah become the target of such a brutal, calculated assault? As news of the shooting spread, the public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Local media outlets reported on the attack, amplifying the fear that had already taken hold of the community. For many residents, the idea that a sniper could strike without warning was terrifying. The randomness of the attack, the lack of any clear motive, and the absence of any suspects created an atmosphere of panic. If Leah could be targeted in such a violent manner, who was safe? The uncertainty bred by the case permeated not only the neighborhood where Leah had lived but also the broader community. Families who once felt secure on their morning commutes were now questioning whether they, too, could be the next target. It wasn't just Leah's family that was shaken. The ripple effect of the attack was felt by everyone who had been touched by her kindness, her professionalism, and her steady presence in the world. The question of whether this was an isolated incident or the beginning of something more sinister was on everyone's mind. For law enforcement, the immediate aftermath presented a series of challenges. There was a palpable sense of urgency to find answers, but every lead they pursued seemed to lead nowhere. Investigators were left with nothing but frustration and the heavy weight of mounting public pressure. As rumors spread and theories about the sniper's identity and motives took root, it became clear that the investigation was only beginning, and the path forward would be long and uncertain. While Leah's family rallied around her, hoping for her recovery, they too were left grappling with the same questions. Was this just a random act of violence, or was there something more behind it? The emotional toll of the attack extended beyond Leah's physical injuries. It was the emotional scars left on those who loved her that would linger long after the immediate aftermath. In a case where no clear answers were forthcoming, the pain of uncertainty was just as harrowing as the violence itself. As the investigation into Leah Monroe's shooting continued, law enforcement faced an increasingly frustrating challenge. The lack of physical evidence and the absence of witnesses meant that every lead they pursued seemed to take them in circles. The chilling fact remained. Someone had fired a high-powered rifle from an elevated position, striking Leah with precision, yet there was no clear path to follow. No weapon, no suspect, and no clear motive. In the face of these dead ends, investigators were forced to rethink their approach. The initial focus was on the ballistic evidence. The single shot that had struck Leah had been fired from a high angle, suggesting that the shooter had positioned themselves in an area with a clear line of sight to the highway. Experts quickly ruled out the possibility of a long-range shot from a concealed position within the landscape. Instead, they concentrated on elevated vantage points, overpasses, buildings, and hillsides, but the search for such a location proved fruitless. Despite combing through the area around the crime scene and scanning for any overlooked vantage point, investigators were no closer to finding the sniper's position. Highway cameras, which had captured several vehicles stopping near the scene, offered another avenue of investigation. Law enforcement officials hoped that the footage might reveal a vehicle linked to the shooter. However, the cameras had captured the vehicles in motion, and the resulting footage was severely compromised by motion blur. The license plates of the vehicles that had stopped were unreadable, leaving the investigators with no leads from these critical pieces of evidence. It was as if the entire crime had been orchestrated to avoid detection, each detail carefully calculated to leave no trace behind. The case soon became one of intense public interest. The media played a major role in keeping the story alive, with reporters speculating on the identity of the sniper and the possibility of future attacks. The public, already on edge, began to worry about the potential for more shootings. Was Leah just the first victim in a series of sniper attacks? Were other commuters at risk? The fear of a serial sniper on the loose created a sense of unease across the city and beyond. But for law enforcement, the pressure was mounting. Every new theory, every public statement, only added to the frustration of not having any concrete leads. As the weeks wore on, investigators began to turn to new technologies in their search for answers. One of the more promising leads came when detectives revisited Leah's car. They found that the bullet had passed through the car, hitting Leah, but no traces of the weapon were found in the immediate vicinity. It seemed that the shot had been fired from an unusually far distance, so far that it might have been missed entirely by anyone on the scene. But the question remained, how had the shooter managed to make such a clean getaway? A breakthrough came when an investigator, reviewing the scene again, noticed something subtle. A faint trail in the grass leading away from a nearby hill. It wasn't much, but it was enough to prompt further investigation. Teams were sent to the area, and after hours of searching, a discarded piece of fabric was found caught on a bush just off the side of the highway. This seemingly insignificant clue turned out to be more important than anyone had realized. The fabric was traced back to a specific type of military-grade clothing, the kind often worn by snipers. While this wasn't definitive proof of the shooter's identity, it was a rare clue that provided a tangible link to a specific group of people who had the skills and knowledge to carry out such an attack. This discovery shifted the course of the investigation. The fabric was not just a random piece of clothing, but a potential connection to a much more significant story. Law enforcement began to consider the possibility that the sniper was someone with specialized training. The idea that this attack was part of a larger, more orchestrated plan seemed increasingly likely. Whether this was a disgruntled individual or someone with military experience remained unclear, but the new lead allowed investigators to refocus their efforts on tracking down anyone with the necessary expertise to carry out such a precise and calculated attack. As the investigation gained new momentum, it became clear that finding the sniper would require not just traditional detective work, but a deep understanding of the behavior and tactics of someone who could operate in the shadows. The revelation of the fabric raised more questions than it answered, but it was a step forward, one that could potentially unlock the mystery behind Leah Monroe's shooting. The case was far from over, but for the first time, investigators felt a glimmer of hope. They had a new lead, a new angle to explore, and the possibility of uncovering the truth seemed a little more tangible. But with no clear suspects and a trail that could disappear at any moment, the road ahead remained uncertain. The search for the sniper was just beginning, and it would take everything law enforcement had to bring them to justice. The consequences of Leah Monroe's shooting rippled far beyond the immediate trauma of the event. For Leah herself, the impact was life-changing. Though she survived the attack, her recovery was slow and painful, both physically and emotionally. The bullet had left lasting scars, not just on her body, but on her psyche. The randomness of the attack, The feeling of being targeted without explanation weighed heavily on her sense of safety. For someone who had always led a routine, predictable life, the knowledge that a sniper could strike without warning shattered her perception of security. The question of why this had happened to her lingered in her mind, unanswered and unresolved. For Leah's family, the aftermath was equally harrowing. Her parents, who had raised her with a sense of safety and normalcy, now found themselves grappling with the harsh reality that their daughter had been chosen at random to suffer such a violent act. They, too, struggled with the uncertainty of not knowing whether this was just a one-time attack or the beginning of something far worse. The pain of seeing their daughter injured was compounded by the constant fear that the attacker might strike again, that the shadow of violence could reach out at any moment and take another innocent life. Her friends, too, were left in a state of shock and confusion. They had witnessed Leah's strength and resilience, yet this attack, so senseless and unexpected, left them questioning everything. Was anyone safe? Was anyone beyond the reach of a sniper's bullet? The psychological toll was immense, and the community at large felt it. The fear that had taken hold after the shooting was not easily shaken off. People became more cautious, more aware of their surroundings, but the uncertainty of the situation made everyone feel vulnerable. The investigation into the shooting continued. But even as leads began to surface, the emotional scars on those affected by the crime remained. The toll of such a random and brutal act lingered, not only on Leah's family, but on the entire community. Everyone felt the weight of the fear and confusion that had been cast upon them. Fear of the unknown, fear of being targeted for reasons that could never be fully understood. As we close this chapter of Leah Monroe's case, we invite you, our viewers, to share your thoughts on this unsettling crime. Do you believe the sniper was targeting Leah, or was she simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? What do you think could have motivated such a calculated, random attack? Join the conversation in the comments below. We want to hear your theories, your insights, and your reflections on this chilling case. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Beyond the Evidence for more in-depth investigations into unsolved mysteries like this one. The search for truth doesn't end here. It continues, with your engagement helping to keep the conversation alive.